Imagine a world where survival itself has no rules, where every shadow hides a predator more terrifying than anything Ellie has ever faced. The infected, the desperate scavengers, nothing could have prepared her for this. A galaxy torn apart by endless war, where reality twists and mutates under the influence of forces beyond comprehension. Every corner, every ruined street, every whisper in the wind threatens to consume her. Not just her body, but her mind. Armed with only her wits, a knife, and scavenged weapons from alien worlds, Ellie steps into the unknown. Massive armored warriors patrol the ruins. Psychic horrors slither in the shadows. And the very air hums with corruption that claws at her thoughts. Will her instincts, honed on the streets of a dying Earth, be enough to navigate the nightmare of this universe? Or will the darkness of the warp claim her first, bending her into something unrecognizable? Ellie's eyes snapped open to a sky that was neither the familiar gray clouds of her world nor the faint orange glow of a firelit city. Instead, a harsh, cold light pierced the gloom, bouncing off jagged metal structures and scorched terrain. The air smelled of burnt oil, dust, and something far more sinister, something that made her skin crawl with instinctive fear. She tried to remember how she had gotten here, but fragments of memory were scattered and jumbled, her last recollection being a collapsing building, Joel's voice echoing in her mind. Her hands instinctively went to her backpack, her fingers brushing the worn edges of her switchblade, the only comforting thing she had carried from her previous life. Around her, the ground was littered with the remnants of war. Broken machinery, twisted metal, and the corpses of soldiers that looked strangely alien and grotesque, their armor scorched and shattered. Each step she took made a metallic crunch, reverberating in the silence that hung heavier than any forest night she had known. She couldn't tell if the world itself was holding its breath, or if it was the oppressive aura of death that clung to everything. Shadows moved in the distance, but she couldn't discern whether they were the movement of wind-blown debris or figures hiding, watching her. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with that old familiar surge of survival instinct that had kept her alive through the cordyceps-ravaged ruins she had once wandered. Every sense screamed at her that she was not in Kansas or Jackson anymore. A faint hum, low and almost mechanical, vibrated through the ground beneath her, causing her to stumble slightly. It wasn't the steady rhythm of a generator or a car engine. It felt alive, malevolent, something she had never encountered before. She crouched, pressing herself against a scorched wall of what might have been a building once, straining her ears, trying to figure out if the sound was a threat or merely part of the alien environment. Her eyes darted across the ruined landscape, and for the first time since waking, she felt the creeping fingers of panic. The sky A sickly green haze streaked with deep crimson clouds seemed to press down on her, making the air thick and hard to breathe. In the distance, the silhouettes of enormous structures loomed, cathedral-like, but twisted, adorned with spires and symbols she did not recognize, symbols that radiated power and danger in a way she instinctively understood. Each step forward made her feel smaller, more fragile, as if the universe itself had expanded into a hostile and incomprehensible labyrinth, one where every shadow could hide death. She noticed strange, claw-like marks gouged into the metal and stone around her, long and deep, as if a creature of immense strength had left its signature on this forsaken world. Her eyes caught a flicker of movement. She froze, pressing herself against the wall, breath shallow. A figure, armored and massive, moved with a precision and weight that made her stomach churn. It wasn't human, not like the people she had known, not even remotely. Its armor reflected the strange light in fragments, giving it a spectral, almost ghostly presence. Ellie's hand instinctively went to her knife again, though she knew it would be useless against something that size, something that could crush her in a heartbeat. Fear coiled around her like a living thing, but beneath it, a spark of curiosity, an irrepressible need to understand, to survive, flickered stubbornly. The wind carried whispers of distant screams, the echo of battle perhaps, though they sounded alien and terrifyingly unending. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of her surroundings, to find a pattern, a route, a way to survive. She remembered Joel, remembered the countless times she had been forced to navigate impossible dangers, and the thought gave her a strange courage, the kind forged only in relentless survival. She moved cautiously, each step measured, listening for the slightest hint of life or movement, eyes scanning the jagged horizon for any sign of refuge or threat. Everything in this world screamed danger, from the alien architecture to the strange energy that pulsed faintly through the ground and air. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to move, had to push forward despite not knowing why or where she was going. The silence between the distant sounds of battle and the hum of alien energy pressed on her nerves, making each second feel like an eternity, a test of her focus and resolve. Shadows lengthened unnaturally as the twin suns, or perhaps one sun and some distant energy source, shifted in the sky, giving the landscape an eerie, shifting perspective. Ellie's instincts told her to hide, to wait, to observe, but another part, the part that had always driven her to explore, to push forward even when the world was crumbling, urged her onward. The air itself seemed alive, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Every step she took, every cautious movement was watched. She was certain of it, by eyes she could not see but could feel, calculating and patient. The world she had known, the forests, The crumbling cities, the infected, all seemed like a distant dream compared to this. This place, where the very air threatened to consume her sanity. Her pulse raced, adrenaline surging, and she knew instinctively that nothing here was like anything she had faced before. She tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles white, ... and slowly moved forward, feeling the weight of every shadow and every echo pressing down on her, understanding fully that this was not a place for the unprepared or the faint-hearted. Each ruin, each broken fragment of metal and stone seemed to whisper stories of battles fought and lost, of horrors unimaginable, and Ellie felt a mixture of dread and fascination. Even as fear gnawed at her, a small, stubborn part of her wondered about the people, if they were people who had fought here, who had walked these scorched grounds. She knew survival depended on caution, but the curiosity that had always been part of her personality, the drive to understand and adapt, flared up against the backdrop of terror. And so she continued, careful but determined, her senses straining with every step, knowing instinctively that this world was alive with dangers she could not yet comprehend, and yet somehow she had to find a way to navigate it, to endure it, to survive it, because pausing, hiding, or surrendering was no longer an option. Ellie had been moving cautiously through the jagged, war-torn streets for what felt like hours, though time in this alien world had a strange, disorienting quality. The buildings around her were twisted and shattered, their surfaces etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe in the corner of her vision, refusing to be fully seen. She kept low, her knife clutched tightly in her hand, muscles tense, ready for anything. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every distant sound made her flinch, and yet she had to keep moving. Her ears picked up the steady thrum of boots on metal, rhythmic and purposeful, echoing through the ruins. She froze behind a broken wall, heart hammering, and watched a patrol of humans, or what looked like humans, march down the street. Their armor was bulky, industrial, adorned with insignias she couldn't identify, and they carried massive guns that emitted a faint, humming energy. They moved with disciplined precision, scanning every corner, every shadow, as if expecting ambush. Ellie's first instinct was to hide, to avoid them completely, but something in their posture, the way they scanned the area, made her pause. She realized that despite their heavy armor and imposing weapons, they were not immediately hostile to her. She ducked behind a ruined vehicle and observed. One of the guards raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. They knelt, scanning the ground and the rubble with strange devices that emitted low, flickering lights. Ellie couldn't understand the technology, but she could feel its purpose. Detection, tracking, analysis. Her pulse quickened. She had faced hunters, raiders, and infected back home, but these humans were something else entirely. Organized, relentless, and aware of their environment in a way that made her feel small and exposed. She considered running, but instinctively knew it would be suicide. Her survival skills, honed over years in the ruins of her own world, told her that discretion and observation were more valuable than reckless flight. She watched as the patrol moved closer, their voices low and clipped, speaking a language she didn't know. Ellie tried to decipher meaning from tone and gesture, realizing that although she didn't understand the words, the intention was clear. They were cautious, but not immediately aggressive. A shadow shifted near her, and her knife hand tightened. One of the guards turned his head sharply, eyes scanning the rubble. Ellie's heart lurched, but he didn't see her. He resumed his careful march, and she exhaled slowly, forcing herself to relax just enough to think. She needed a plan, any plan, to make herself understood if they noticed her. Her mind raced through possibilities. She could run, she could fight, or she could try to signal her non-hostile intentions. She opted for the last, crouching low and slowly raising her hands, showing empty palms, a universal gesture she hoped conveyed that she wasn't a threat. The patrol halted abruptly, one of them pointing his weapon at her. Ellie froze, realizing the precariousness of her choice. Slowly, she dropped her hands and crouched lower, her eyes meeting the helmeted figure in front of her. There was a pause, a tension that made her stomach twist. Then, unexpectedly, the figure lowered his weapon slightly, tilting his head as if trying to understand. Ellie seized the moment. She mimed following, gesturing to indicate she meant no harm, that she simply wanted to survive, to move with them rather than against them. The guards studied her for a long, nerve-wracking moment, then gave a short, sharp gesture, signaling her to follow. Relief flooded through her, tempered by caution. Trust was a dangerous gamble in this world. She rose slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening, and fell into step behind the patrol, her senses straining for any sign of deception or sudden violence. The guards' equipment hummed and clicked as they moved, a strange symphony of alien technology. Ellie tried to absorb everything, the way they communicated without words, the gestures and signals, the way they moved as one unit. She realized she would need to learn quickly if she wanted to survive among them. Every sound of distant battle, every flicker of movement in the shadows, made her flinch, yet she also felt a thrill of determination. She had always adapted, always survived, and now she was in a new arena, one that required new rules and instincts. The patrol moved through the ruins, occasionally pausing to scan corners or rubble, and Ellie followed, mimicking their cautious movements. She noticed their discipline, the way they covered each other, the silent signals that conveyed complex commands. It was a dance of survival and vigilance, one that fascinated her, even as fear gnawed at her. As they moved, Ellie caught glimpses of other figures in the distance, more patrols, more armored humans, moving with similar precision. The scale of the Imperium's reach was staggering, and Ellie's mind raced with questions about where she had landed, what factions existed, and what dangers lay ahead. Her survival instincts sharpened, every nerve ending alive with awareness, as she realized that trusting this patrol, even cautiously, might be her only chance to navigate this hostile world. She mirrored their movements, stayed low, kept her breathing quiet, and learned quickly to anticipate their gestures and pauses. Even as tension gripped her, a strange sense of purpose emerged. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning, adapting, becoming part of a rhythm that might, just might, keep her alive in this galaxy of endless war. The patrol entered a larger open area, a ruined plaza littered with debris and the skeletal remains of structures. And Ellie followed carefully, understanding that every step was being observed. The guards moved with a silent efficiency, and Ellie matched their pace, careful not to draw attention. Each moment, each glance, each cautious step was a test, and she realized that survival here demanded more than instinct. It demanded observation, adaptation, and an unyielding will to endure against forces that made even the infected of her world seem trivial by comparison. She kept her senses sharp, noting patterns, memorizing gestures, and silently vowing that she would find a way to navigate this new reality, one careful step at a time, learning from those who already seemed to understand the deadly rules of this place. Ellie moved cautiously through the twisted streets, her eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, every scrap of debris that might conceal some lurking danger. The patrol she had followed earlier had vanished around a corner, leaving her alone again, and the silence pressed on her like a physical weight. She crouched behind a crumbled wall, fingers brushing the hilt of her knife as she tried to make sense of the world around her. There was a strange hum in the air, low and insistent, vibrating through the cracked pavement and into her bones. It wasn't a sound she could identify, not a natural wind or machine she had ever heard. It resonated with something deep inside her, a primal unease she couldn't name, like the subtle pull of a predator stalking just beyond perception. The sky above shifted in unsettling patterns, green and crimson clouds swirling, as if alive, casting sickly shadows across the ground. Ellie's instincts screamed at her that she wasn't alone, that this world itself was breathing, watching, and subtly altering her perception of reality. Her mind flickered to the stories Joel used to tell her, the warnings about trust, danger, and the things that humans could become when desperation took hold. She realized quickly that the threats here weren't just physical. They were psychic, mutative, something that could twist the mind and body without leaving a single scar. Moving slowly, she noticed subtle signs of this corruption. The ground was littered with strange growths, not plants, not fungi, but something in between, pulsing faintly, glistening with an almost imperceptible light. When she stepped near one, it shivered, as if aware of her presence. Ellie recoiled, pressing herself against the wall, every nerve ending straining to detect movement, sound, intent. The further she walked, the more she realized that this place was alive in ways she had never experienced. Shadows moved with a will of their own, and distant whispers brushed at the edge of her consciousness. She paused, holding her breath, trying to distinguish between auditory hallucinations and reality, a way her brain had learned to do in the ruined cities of her world. Her survival instincts flared, honed over years of dodging infected and hostile humans. But here, they were insufficient against the subtle, insidious presence she felt pressing against her mind. She walked along a narrow corridor of rubble-strewn streets, noticing the strange residues on the walls, smeared symbols, scratches that seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light. Ellie instinctively traced them with her eyes, trying to memorize patterns, trying to understand their significance, but they defied comprehension. She had learned long ago that in unfamiliar environments, observation was survival. But here, observation brought no comfort, only a mounting dread. Her thoughts kept flicking back to the creatures she had encountered in her world, but none of them compared to the corruption here, the alien influence that made the very air feel heavy and oppressive. She could feel it tugging at her, teasing her awareness, challenging her focus. Ellie's hands shook slightly as she gripped her knife, but she forced herself to stay calm. She began to notice more signs of mutation, subtle at first, small, flickering distortions in the shapes of debris, the way shadows bent unnaturally, the way light refracted oddly off certain surfaces. It was as if reality itself was unstable, not just the people or creatures inhabiting it. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to move deliberately. Each step measured and cautious. She recalled Joel's lessons on watching for signs, reading environments, predicting movement, and applied them here, even though the rules of this world seemed alien. As she advanced, she spotted a creature in the distance, hunched and twitching, its form constantly shifting, as if struggling to hold a shape. Ellie froze, heart hammering, eyes locked on it. It didn't notice her at first, but she could sense its awareness growing, a psychic prickling at the edge of her perception. Slowly, she backed into an alcove, trying to avoid drawing attention, watching as the thing's form stabilized into something vaguely humanoid, yet utterly wrong. Its skin shimmered unnaturally, patches of twisted growth pulsating with a sickly green glow. Ellie's stomach turned. She had seen mutations before, but never like this. Never so overtly influenced by some alien will. She realized that these creatures were extensions of the corruption she had been feeling. Not random monsters, but manifestations of the warp's insidious touch. Every movement, every twitch of its limbs sent ripples of psychic pressure toward her, and Ellie instinctively lowered her head, focused on controlling her breathing, willing herself to remain unseen. She had survived countless dangers in her world, but here, survival demanded more than stealth and agility. It demanded an understanding of forces beyond comprehension. As she moved on, Ellie noticed more subtle signs, distorted echoes, whispers that seemed to follow her, shadows that moved independently of any light source. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to focus on tangible survival tactics, paths, cover, escape routes. Her senses were overloaded, but she relied on instinct, adapting to the alien stimuli as best she could. Every step was a test of awareness, every pause a measure of her ability to remain unnoticed. And she realized that in this world, failure was more than death. It was total corruption, a loss of self to forces she could barely comprehend. The ground beneath her vibrated faintly, and she adjusted her footing, sensing that the mutations weren't confined to creatures alone, but pervaded the environment, shaping and twisting reality around her. Ellie's mind raced, processing how to avoid detection while still moving forward, how to interpret the subtle signs of this world, and how to preserve her humanity when everything seemed designed to strip it away. She had always survived through observation, quick thinking, and a relentless will to endure. But here, those tools were just the beginning. The subtle awareness of mutation, the psychic currents, the alien distortions, the whispers at the edge of perception, was now the landscape she had to navigate. Her muscles tensed as she pressed forward, senses alert, every fiber of her being aware that this world demanded more than anything she had faced before. And yet, beneath the fear and the suffocating sense of danger, a spark of resolve ignited. She had always adapted, always learned, always survived. Now, in the face of the warp's corruptive whispers and the alien mutations crawling across this world, she had to rely on that same stubborn determination to move, observe, and endure, knowing that the slightest misstep could be fatal, and that understanding these subtle signs of mutation might be the only way to navigate the relentless dangers surrounding her. Ellie crouched behind a crumbling wall, her eyes scanning the ruined street ahead, trying to make sense of the alien machines and weapons scattered across the battlefield. She had encountered enough danger in her own world to know that adaptation was key, but nothing she had ever faced prepared her for this. Bolters, lasguns, and strange devices with glowing cores littered the wreckage, some still humming faintly as if alive. Her fingers brushed over one of the lasguns, the weight unfamiliar yet oddly balanced. She pulled it closer, inspecting it, noting the intricate symbols etched into its body, the strange mechanism that she instinctively understood controlled the firing. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and curiosity, the same rush she felt when scavenging supplies in abandoned buildings, but amplified tenfold. The world around her was harsh, unrelenting, and unforgiving, and she knew that relying on instinct alone wouldn't be enough to survive. As she experimented cautiously, gripping the weapon with tentative hands, she realized that the recoil and trigger mechanism were unlike anything she had used before, requiring precision and patience. She practiced pulling the trigger, aiming at a distant pile of rubble, the beam of light shooting out with a sizzling intensity that made her flinch and instinctively duck. The weapon felt alive, powerful, and dangerous, and she understood that misuse could be fatal, either to her or to anything unfortunate enough to be in the line of fire. Ellie's mind raced, analyzing the technology, trying to draw parallels with firearms she had known, trying to translate her old skills into this new, deadly context. She picked up a smaller weapon, a sidearm with glowing markings, experimenting with its weight and balance. She discovered that each weapon had a rhythm, a pulse she had to sync with, and slowly her confidence grew, muscles adapting to unfamiliar grips and triggers. Around her, the ruins echoed with distant gunfire, the staccato of battles that seemed unending, each shot a reminder of the world's relentless hostility. Ellie realized that understanding these weapons wasn't just about survival. It was about gaining agency in a universe where she otherwise felt powerless. Her eyes caught sight of a chainsword, lying discarded, near a toppled statue, its teeth jagged and glinting in the pale light. She hesitated, remembering the brutal effectiveness of such weapons, imagining herself swinging it in desperate defense. Fear and thrill intertwined as she wrapped her hands around the handle, feeling the raw weight and deadly promise. She tested the mechanism, the motor whirring to life with a terrifying hum, and Ellie instinctively stepped back, realizing the potential for destruction she now held. It was exhilarating and horrifying all at once, a lesson in responsibility and power. The streets themselves seemed to challenge her as she navigated through rubble, adjusting her stance, testing her balance, and imagining combat scenarios she had only faced in the shadows of her old world. She practiced moving silently, with weapons in hand, the bolter's weight shifting her center of gravity, the chainsword threatening to bite at any misstep. Each movement, each experiment, was a dance of survival, a combination of instinct, observation, and adaptation. Ellie's mind analyzed the potential threats around her, noting patterns in distant firefights, imagining how she might intervene, defend, or escape. Her hands grew steady, her reflexes sharper, the combination of old survival skills and new technology beginning to merge into something effective. She realized that the weapons were more than tools. They were extensions of her will, amplifiers of her instinct and cunning. Even as fear gnawed at her, she felt a growing sense of empowerment, a tiny but significant assertion of control in a world that seemed determined to overwhelm her. She began to experiment with combining weapons, holding one in each hand, trying to coordinate movement and aim, testing limits she didn't even know she had. Each successful attempt, each realization of capability, bolstered her confidence, though she remained acutely aware of the dangers surrounding her. Ellie's mind mapped the battlefield, noting cover, escape routes, and vantage points, integrating her newfound understanding of weapons into a broader strategy for survival. She tested her aim, adjusting for recoil, distance, and unfamiliar mechanics, each shot a lesson in precision and restraint. In the eerie silence between distant battles, she could hear the hum of alien technology, the subtle vibrations of the ground, and the distant cries of creatures corrupted by the warp. Each sound, each signal, sharpened her awareness, forcing her to move, adapt, and anticipate. She found herself moving through corridors of rubble with newfound confidence, switching weapons fluidly, practicing maneuvers she had never considered before. Her body adapted quickly, muscles learning the weight and balance, hands adjusting instinctively, her mind calculating outcomes and responses with a clarity born of necessity. She understood now that survival depended not just on courage or instinct, but on mastering these strange tools, on becoming fluent in a language of destruction she had never spoken. Each weapon she picked up became a lesson, a challenge, and a lifeline, and Ellie embraced it fully, realizing that to survive in this galaxy, she would need to blend her old instincts with these new instruments of war. She moved through the ruined streets with purpose, testing her skills, refining her techniques, and imagining scenarios of both defense and escape. Every movement, a rehearsal for the unpredictable horrors that waited beyond the next corner. Every breath, a preparation for the trials of this relentless, war-torn universe. The weight of the bolter in her hands, the hum of the chainsword, the glow of the lasgun. They were more than just weapons. They were keys to agency in a world that seemed designed to strip it from her. And Ellie understood that mastery over them could mean the difference between life and death, survival and annihilation, humanity and corruption. Ellie crept through the shattered streets, her senses stretched taut like bowstrings, every sound amplified, every flicker of movement triggering the fight or flight instinct that had kept her alive for years. The distant echo of boots and chants reached her ears, but unlike the disciplined patrols she had followed earlier, these were chaotic, unpredictable, and full of malice. Shadows flickered along the jagged walls, cast by fires that burned with unnatural colors. Green and violet flames licking the twisted metal and stone. Ellie pressed herself against a crumbling barricade, heart hammering, and tried to make sense of the movement ahead. Figures emerged from the smoke, humanoid but grotesque, their armor adorned with jagged spikes and twisted sigils that seemed to writhe and shimmer as if alive. Their faces were hidden beneath masks that reflected their devotion to some dark power. and their chants carried a hypnotic cadence that made her stomach churn. She recognized the danger immediately. These were not ordinary humans, not the raiders or desperate survivors she had known, but followers of a malevolent force, chaos cultists, driven by zealotry and corruption. Fear coiled inside her, tight and suffocating. Yet a familiar spark of determination flared. She had survived countless encounters with infected, hostile scavengers, and monsters that defied reason. And she knew that running blindly was not an option. Her eyes scanned for cover, for a path that would allow her to approach unnoticed, to observe before engaging or fleeing. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to be patient, to strike only when the advantage was absolute. The cultists moved with a disturbing synchronicity, yet with an unpredictability born of madness. They gestured to one another with jerky motions, chanting louder as they approached a ruined plaza, where a faint greenish glow emanated from a cracked stone altar. Ellie crouched lower, drawing her knife, her fingers brushing the cold metal, her mind racing through the possible scenarios. The cultists were gathering for a ritual, she realized, and the consequences of interruption could be deadly. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she weighed her options, knowing that exposure could mean not just death, but a twisted form of slaughter that no knife could prevent. She crept closer, silent and deliberate, weaving between debris and fallen statues, testing the limits of her courage and patience. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and whispers seemed to slither at the edges of her perception. Some of them alien, some eerily familiar, as if the warp itself was reaching for her mind. Ellie forced herself to focus on tangible threats, the cultists themselves, their positions, their weapons, and the flow of their movements. She noticed a figure at the center of the ritual, arms raised, chanting louder than the others, exuding an aura of authority and malevolence. Her stomach twisted at the thought of confronting such a figure, but survival demanded both observation and understanding. She tested a small, deliberate movement, peeking over a shattered wall, measuring distance, timing, and reaction. One of the cultists' heads turned sharply, a glint of red light catching her eye, and she froze, holding her breath as the figure's gaze swept past her position. Relief surged as he moved on, but the tension lingered, coiling tight in her chest. She realized that any misstep could be fatal, and yet she could not simply remain paralyzed. Every ounce of her training, every lesson learned in the ruins of her world had prepared her for stealth, for patience, for reading an enemy's behavior. She began to map the movements in her mind, anticipating their paths, identifying blind spots, escape routes, and opportunities for diversion. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear alone, but from the adrenaline and the sharp awareness of her own vulnerability. These cultists were not just armed, they were fanatical, willing to die or kill with abandon, and the slightest provocation could unleash a deadly torrent of violence. Ellie's eyes caught a fallen piece of rubble, jagged and heavy, and she imagined using it to distract or incapacitate a guard, her mind running through countless improvisations. She adjusted her position, careful to keep her profile low, matching the rhythm of the shadows, blending her movements with the flickering light. The chants grew louder, and she realized they were building to a crescendo, the ritual approaching a moment of dangerous culmination. Her instincts screamed that waiting, watching, and understanding were paramount, that any rash action could tip the balance against her. She noted their gestures, the subtle signs of command and obedience, the patterns of movement that revealed hierarchy and intention. Ellie's body tensed as one cultist wandered closer to her hiding spot, sniffing the air, his head cocking unnaturally as if sensing her presence. She froze, muscles rigid, forcing herself to remain invisible. Silent and unbreathing, her mind raced, calculating distances, timing, and potential consequences. Slowly, methodically, she inched backward, never letting her eyes leave the cultists, merging observation with instinct, blending caution with the need to survive. She considered retreat, retracing her steps along paths she had memorized. Yet the unknown terrain behind her seemed just as dangerous as the fanatics ahead. Ellie's pulse raced, but beneath the fear was clarity. She understood that confronting these cultists head-on was folly. Her advantage lay in stealth, in patience, and in the careful use of whatever weapons or environment she could command. Every nerve was alert, every sense engaged as she plotted movement, watching the flicker of shadows, the twitch of fingers, the sway of ritual robes, and the subtle energy that radiated from the altar. She could feel the corruption in the air, the presence of something alien and malevolent, pressing on her mind and testing her resolve. Her body reacted automatically, crouching lower, adjusting balance, preparing to spring into action if necessary, blending reflex with strategy. Ellie's thoughts flickered briefly to Joel, to lessons in survival, in understanding threats before they became unmanageable, and she realized that now more than ever, those lessons were vital. The cultists' movements became more frenetic, more unpredictable, the ritual's crescendo approaching. And Ellie knew she had to maintain focus, to read, adapt, and exploit the subtle openings that only a trained, observant survivor could perceive. She shifted slightly, testing angles, noting escape paths, and imagining contingencies for every potential confrontation. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a balance of fear, calculation, and the relentless drive to survive. To navigate the chaos of fanatical humans whose devotion to dark forces made them unpredictable and deadly, yet whose patterns, if carefully observed, could be understood and used to Ellie's advantage. Ellie moved cautiously through the twisted streets, her senses still sharpened from the recent encounters with chaos cultists. The ruins around her were jagged, metallic, and scorched, the air heavy with the stench of burned flesh and ozone. Her heart pounded as she navigated the labyrinth of rubble, scanning every shadow, every corner, for signs of life or death. Suddenly, she caught sight of a figure moving with a precision and power that made her freeze. Towering and heavily armored, the being exuded an aura of authority and menace, its armor adorned with symbols that she did not understand, but instinctively feared. The way it moved suggested a strength and discipline far beyond any human she had known. She ducked behind a fallen beam, watching as it paused, scanning the ruins with methodical intent. Its helmet, angular and imposing, reflected the strange light from above, giving it a spectral presence that seemed almost otherworldly. Ellie's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, yet a curious part of her urged observation. She had survived by understanding her enemies, by reading them, and perhaps this being, powerful as it was, could become an unexpected ally, or a threat worse than any she had faced. Tentatively, she stepped out from cover, hands raised slightly in a gesture of non-aggression, aware that any misstep could be fatal. The armored figure turned sharply, and for a moment, Ellie thought it would attack. Instead, it tilted its head, studying her with what felt like an appraisal. She caught a faint glint beneath the visor, a hint of intelligence, of recognition. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it gestured for her to follow. Ellie's muscles tensed. Trust was dangerous here, but opportunity and survival often demanded calculated risks. She mirrored its movements, staying low and deliberate, keeping her breathing even. The Space Marine's presence radiated discipline, a silent command of the battlefield, and Ellie realized that shadowing this figure could teach her not just how to survive, but how to navigate this alien and violent world. As they moved together, she noted the way it scanned every ruin, the precision in every step, the silent communication with distant allies through subtle gestures and signals. Ellie's mind raced, trying to absorb these lessons while suppressing her fear. She had always relied on stealth, cunning, and instinct, but here, she was learning a new language of survival, one written in armor, weapons, and unspoken authority. They passed through streets littered with debris, the remnants of battles fought long before her arrival, and Ellie caught glimpses of other figures, smaller, human perhaps, moving under the watchful gaze of the towering Marine. Every interaction, every movement became a lesson. She began to mimic the Marine's posture, its vigilance, its calculation, learning to read threats in the subtle shifts of shadows, in the flicker of light across broken surfaces. Occasionally, the Marine would pause, scanning the area, and Ellie would instinctively crouch, learning the rhythms of danger and the importance of patience. The city around them seemed alive with menace, creatures that slithered in the ruins, twisted by the warp, moved with eerie, deliberate intent, their presence a constant reminder that this world was unforgiving. Ellie's hands shook slightly as she reached for a weapon she had scavenged earlier, testing its weight and balance, learning to integrate it into her movements while remaining alert to the threats the Marine seemed to detect with effortless calculation. They entered a larger open area, a plaza where shattered statues and ruined structures formed natural cover. Ellie's pulse raced as she noted the Marine's focus, its weapon raised, scanning, ready to strike. She realized that its presence alone altered the dynamics of potential conflict. The way enemies moved, the confidence it projected, the authority it wielded without a word. For the first time in this galaxy of chaos, Ellie felt a flicker of security, a fragile understanding that she was not entirely alone, that survival might be possible through alliances, however unexpected. She followed the Marine into a narrow corridor between ruins, the light dim, shadows deepening, and the sense of danger intensified. Ellie's mind raced, cataloging every potential threat, every vantage point, every escape route. The Marine's silence taught her patience, its every movement a guide to reading the battlefield, anticipating threats before they became immediate. Occasionally, Ellie caught glimpses of its face beneath the visor, or what she imagined might be a face, and sensed a curiosity, perhaps even a cautious approval of her cautious movements. Trust was tentative and fragile, yet the bond formed through shared necessity began to take shape, a fragile tether in a world defined by hostility and uncertainty. They moved past the remnants of structures scarred by battle, and Ellie felt the weight of history pressing down, understanding that survival here meant more than avoiding death. It meant understanding the forces, human and alien, that shaped the battlefield. Every twitch of her muscles, every calculated step, was measured against the Marine's example. Integrating old survival instincts with lessons in vigilance, discipline, and strategy that the towering figure embodied, Ellie realized that in learning to move with the Marine, she was not just seeking protection. She was learning a language of war, of anticipation, of adaptation that might allow her to confront enemies she could not yet even imagine. The distant sounds of battle echoed through the ruined city, faint and intermittent, yet their presence influenced every decision, every pause, every breath. Ellie moved with awareness, keeping close, absorbing the silent teachings of the Marine, learning when to advance, when to halt, when to observe, and when to react. Her mind cataloged every subtle motion, every signal, every nuance of presence and threat, understanding that in this galaxy, survival depended not just on courage or instinct, but on the ability to learn from those who wielded power and discipline effortlessly. The bond, tenuous though it was, offered her a fragile hope, a chance to navigate the dangers ahead with guidance, observation, and a growing sense of purpose. Ellie stepped cautiously onto the landing platform of what appeared to be a transport vessel, her senses immediately assaulted by the unfamiliar atmosphere. The air smelled metallic and acrid, heavy with ozone and the faint tang of alien flora carried in from outside. She looked around, eyes wide, taking in the towering walls of the craft, lined with conduits and panels glowing faintly with eerie green and blue lights. The rhythmic hum of machinery reverberated through the floor, vibrating up through her boots and making her pulse quicken. Outside the viewport, worlds unlike any she had ever known stretched into the distance. Planets with swirling violet skies, jagged mountain ranges that pierced the clouds, oceans of shimmering liquid that reflected alien suns. Her stomach twisted with a mix of awe and fear. Each world seemed alive, yet hostile, brimming with danger and mystery. And she understood instantly that survival would demand every ounce of her wits and courage. The transport shuddered, and Ellie instinctively crouched, gripping her weapons, feeling the pulse of energy through the metal beneath her hands. As the vessel descended toward the surface of a planet scarred by endless warfare, she noticed the terrain. Sprawling fields of jagged rock, rivers of molten metal, forests of towering spore-laden trees that writhed as if aware. Shadows shifted unnaturally across the landscape, and Ellie's instincts screamed at her that every movement might conceal a predator or a trap. She had faced infected hordes and desperate humans, but these alien worlds offered threats that defied comprehension. Creatures and forces that could bend perception and twist reality. The craft landed with a thunderous roar, shaking the ground and sending clouds of dust and ash into the air. Ellie moved toward the exit ramp, every step deliberate, muscles tensed, senses scanning the horizon. Strange cries echoed from the distance, neither wholly animal nor human, carrying a resonance that pricked at the edge of her mind, stirring both curiosity and dread. She ducked behind a jagged outcropping of rock, observing the environment. Plants with translucent, pulsating leaves shifted as if following her movement, and she noticed glimpses of creatures in the distance, some with multiple limbs, others with chitinous shells, moving with predatory grace. Ellie's breathing was steady, but her mind raced, calculating distances, potential threats, and routes of escape. Each alien sound was analyzed, each shadow measured, as she navigated this unfamiliar and hostile world. The sky was a shifting canvas of violet and green, streaked with lightning that carried an unnatural glow. Ellie realized that weather itself here seemed alive, reacting to some unseen force, and she adjusted her movements to account for sudden gusts of wind or flickers of light that could betray her position. As she advanced, she noticed structures in the distance, ruins that suggested the remnants of civilizations long past. Their architecture alien but imposing, towers and spires twisting into the sky, covered in strange runes and markings. Ellie approached cautiously, every step calculated, aware that these ruins might be hiding both shelter and threat. She crouched behind a fallen column, studying the layout, noting entrances, potential choke points, and elevated vantage positions. Her mind mapped escape routes in case she needed to retreat, drawing upon the survival strategies honed in her own world. A sudden movement caught her eye, a creature slinking across the ruins, its form shifting unnaturally, mutating as it moved, a predator adapted to the alien environment. Ellie froze, heart hammering, and observed its patterns, noting its behavior and potential weaknesses. She understood that these alien worlds were alive with predators, some overt, some hidden, and that learning their rhythms was essential for survival. Further along, she spotted a cluster of Xenos structures, possibly inhabited, their surfaces pulsing faintly with light that seemed to communicate something she could not yet comprehend. Ellie approached carefully, using the terrain as cover, her senses straining to detect movement, listening for the subtle hum of energy or the whisper of claws against stone. Each step forward was a calculated risk, balancing curiosity with caution. She realized that these worlds were lessons in observation, patience, and adaptability, each presenting unique challenges and tests of both mind and body. Strange flora and fauna shifted subtly around her, some moving with intent, others responding to unseen stimuli. Ellie adapted her pace, learning to move silently, to read the alien environment as she had learned to read the ruined cities of her world. The landscape itself seemed to challenge her, shifting subtly, forcing her to remain vigilant, to anticipate danger before it revealed itself. As she traversed a narrow ridge overlooking a valley of molten rivers and jagged spires, she caught sight of movement below. Creatures assembled in what looked like coordinated hunting behavior. Predators far more intelligent than anything she had faced. Ellie pressed herself against the ridge, heart pounding, memorizing their patterns, calculating the timing needed to navigate safely past them. She felt the pulse of the planet beneath her, a subtle vibration that hinted at something massive, perhaps underground, and adjusted her steps to minimize noise, to blend with the rhythm of the alien terrain. Her senses, honed from years of surviving in hostile environments, were now fully engaged, integrating visual, auditory, and tactile cues to map her surroundings. Every shadow, every shimmer, every flicker of movement carried meaning. Ellie moved cautiously, balancing forward momentum with the constant awareness that these worlds were alive with danger, both seen and unseen, and that understanding their rhythms, their mutations, and their hidden patterns was essential to surviving long enough to uncover the secrets they held. The alien sky shifted as twin moons rose, casting eerie, elongated shadows across the landscape, and Ellie pressed herself against a rock outcropping, planning her next move, knowing that each decision could mean life or death in a universe where predators and Xeno's horrors lurked at every turn. Ellie's footsteps were silent against the cracked metal and stone of the abandoned fortress she had taken refuge in. But the oppressive aura of the warp pressed against her mind like a living thing. Every shadow seemed to twitch with intent, every whisper of wind carrying faint, mocking voices that tugged at her thoughts. She could feel it, subtle at first, a tickling sensation at the edges of perception. Then stronger, like a hand brushing against her consciousness. Chaos whispered promises, tempting her with power, strength, and freedom from fear. And Ellie felt the familiar tug of temptation, a test of her morality and resilience. Her hand instinctively went to the switchblade she had carried for years, the cold metal grounding her in the tangible, reminding her of the world she had left behind. The warp's influence was insidious. It didn't strike with immediate violence, but with subtle, almost seductive manipulations, altering perception, warping thought, and planting seeds of doubt. Ellie crouched behind a fractured wall, eyes scanning the darkened corridors, trying to focus on the reality around her. The air shimmered faintly, distorting shapes and colors, and she felt the familiar thrill of fear mixed with fascination, a dangerous cocktail that both paralyzed and compelled her. Images flickered at the edges of her vision, visions of what she could become if she surrendered to the whispers. Stronger, unstoppable, unbound by morality or empathy. She shook her head violently, fighting the pull, reminding herself of Joel, of the countless people she had lost, and of the humanity she had fought so hard to preserve. Her breathing was shallow, calculated, as she moved through the hallways, testing her control over the situation. Every creak of metal, every distant rumble, could have been the warp manifesting physically, or an enemy drawn to her presence. And Ellie treated each sound as a potential threat. The temptation grew stronger, whispers of power twisting into images of survival without restraint, of being able to dominate any foe, to never feel fear again. Ellie's mind wavered momentarily, a flash of exhilaration passing through her. But she tightened her grip on reality, grounding herself with memory and instinct. She thought of her past, the lessons learned in Jackson, the trust broken and rebuilt, the small acts of kindness and bravery that had defined her, and she clung to them as a lifeline. As she moved further into the fortress, she noticed subtle signs of corruption. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if the stone itself were breathing. Shadows moved unnaturally, and the air carried a sickly, almost metallic scent. Ellie's stomach twisted as she realized that the warp wasn't just influencing her mind. It had physical presence here, warping reality itself. She pressed herself against a doorway, forcing her thoughts back to the immediate, to survival, to observation, and to the constant awareness that any lapse could be fatal. The whispers became clearer, coalescing into voices, taunting, coaxing, challenging her, probing for weaknesses. Ellie's pulse raced as she forced herself to focus on tangible threats. The structure of the fortress, potential ambush points, and the tools she could use to defend herself. She noticed a faint glow from a distant chamber and instinctively approached with caution. Every muscle tensed, senses stretched to the limit. The whispers intensified as she neared, weaving images of power and destruction into her mind, suggesting that surrender would make her stronger, faster, invincible. Ellie shook her head, trying to banish the visions, and relied on the instincts that had kept her alive for years: observation, patience, and careful planning. She pressed forward, aware that the warp's influence could twist even her perception of allies and enemies. And she carefully tested her senses, confirming the reality of shapes and movements around her. As she explored, she found evidence of previous victims, twisted beyond recognition, their forms and minds consumed by the very whispers now clawing at her own resolve. Horror and empathy battled within her, and she clutched her knife tighter, drawing strength from the tangible, the real, the things she could touch and hold. She understood that the warp offered shortcuts and power at the cost of her humanity, and she resisted, moving deliberately, calculating each step, each breath, each choice, knowing that awareness and caution were her only defenses. A sudden shift in the air, a low vibration, made her pause, and Ellie felt the insidious fingers of the warp brush at her mind, probing, testing, seeking cracks in her resolve. She grounded herself, focusing on what was real, what she could see and touch, and the memory of Joel and her past companions gave her the strength to resist. Moving deeper, she realized the whispers were learning her, adapting, seeking to exploit fear, anger, and desperation. But she countered with deliberate calm, a mental discipline born of years surviving against impossible odds. Every shadow now carried potential threat, but Ellie trained herself to distinguish between true danger and the seductive illusions of the warp. The fortress twisted and shifted subtly, as if responding to her presence, but she forced herself to remain observant, patient, and rational, taking measured steps, grounding herself in tangible survival tactics. Her resolve strengthened as she navigated the corridors, resisting the temptation to surrender to the whispers, understanding that the choices she made now would define her, preserve her humanity and allow her to survive in a universe that sought to consume both body and soul. Each careful movement, each suppressed panic, was a battle within itself, a confrontation with both the environment and her own mind, as Ellie fought to remain herself, to endure, and to navigate the insidious threats that the warp presented in every shadow, whisper, and distorted flicker of reality. Ellie's breathing was shallow as she crept through the twisted streets of the ruined city, her senses stretched to their limits. The air was thick with ash and the metallic tang of blood, carrying faint echoes of distant battles, each one a reminder of the dangers lurking beyond her sight. Her hands gripped her weapons tightly, one familiar and one alien, a bolter she had scavenged, and her ever-present switchblade, grounding her in both the known and the unknown. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the crumbling walls, flickering with strange light that seemed to come from nowhere, and Ellie's pulse quickened with a mixture of fear and fascination. Every step was a calculated risk, a dance between remaining hidden and moving forward, and she relied on instincts honed over years of survival in a world decimated by the infected. The distant echo of war machines reverberated through the streets, and she caught glimpses of massive armored figures, their armor etched with symbols that radiated authority and menace. Ellie froze behind a fractured wall, her heart hammering, and studied their movements, noting the disciplined precision of each step, each gesture. She realized that understanding these beings, their strengths, patterns, and weaknesses, was crucial for survival. Her mind raced, recalling every lesson learned from navigating hostile humans and infected, and applying them to this new and alien battlefield. The streets were littered with debris, broken machinery, and the remnants of lives once lived, each object a potential hiding spot or trap. Ellie crouched low, adjusting her movements to blend with the shifting shadows, her eyes flicking constantly for signs of threat. A sudden scuffle in the distance caught her attention. A group of lesser mutants, corrupted and misshapen, moved with jagged, jerky motions, their claws scraping metal and stone as they hunted. Ellie's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to remain calm, calculating the safest path to avoid detection while keeping her focus on the larger armored figures. The oppressive air carried a subtle psychic hum, a presence she could feel brushing against her mind, and she understood instinctively that this world was alive with dangers beyond the physical. Ellie forced herself to concentrate on the tangible, on the immediate threats and opportunities, grounding herself with the rhythm of her breathing and the weight of her weapons. She moved forward cautiously, testing each step, listening for echoes, and observing the patterns of movement around her. Every flicker of motion, every sound was analyzed, cataloged, and stored in her mind as she plotted her route through the ruins. A distant explosion shook the ground, sending a cloud of dust into the air, and Ellie pressed herself against a wall, heart racing, recognizing both the danger and the potential distraction it provided. She used the cover to advance, silently, steadily, integrating her instincts with careful observation, only shadows melting into darkness. Knowing that one misstep could expose her to both mutant predators and the disciplined armored figures she had been watching, her mind cycled through contingencies, imagining encounters and outcomes, balancing risk with opportunity, constantly adjusting her strategy to the dynamic environment. She noticed patterns in the armored figures' patrols, subtle gestures and signals, and began to anticipate their movements, learning to navigate in tandem with their presence without drawing attention. Ellie's confidence grew as she adapted to this rhythm, her body and mind syncing with the flow of the battlefield, each movement deliberate and precise. She paused to observe a narrow alleyway where shadows pooled densely and debris created natural cover, considering both the dangers and advantages of using it to bypass a group of mutants. Her heart raced as she weighed her options, recognizing that survival required both courage and patience, the ability to act decisively when opportunity presented itself. As she moved through the alley, Ellie felt the oppressive presence of the warp lingering at the edges of her perception, whispering possibilities of power and shortcuts, and she fought to suppress the seductive allure. Grounding herself in memory, instinct, and tangible threats, she emerged onto a broader street, observing the landscape that stretched before her. Twisted spires, shattered buildings, and the distant hum of war machinery, all evidence of an ongoing conflict she had yet to fully comprehend. Ellie's muscles tensed as she adjusted her stance, weapons ready, and her mind cataloged potential hazards, escape routes, and tactical advantages. Every sound, from the faint rustle of metal to the distant roar of engines, carried significance, and she used each to refine her understanding of the battlefield. The mutant predators moved unpredictably, but Ellie noted their patterns, learning the subtle cues that indicated hunting behavior, aggression, and distraction. She adapted her movements, blending stealth with calculated progress, her body responding instinctively to cues both familiar and alien. The armored figures in the distance shifted in unison, responding to unseen signals, and Ellie realized that she was now part of a complex environment where awareness, adaptability, and timing were crucial. Each step brought new challenges, a fallen beam blocking her path, a flickering light revealing a potential hazard, a shadow moving in the periphery of her vision. She adjusted accordingly, her mind balancing multiple inputs, constantly reassessing threats and opportunities. Ellie's pulse remained high, but a growing sense of focus emerged, a clarity born of acute observation, adaptability, and the merging of old instincts with new knowledge. She moved deliberately through the ruined cityscape, aware of both immediate dangers and distant possibilities, learning to navigate the complex interplay of predator, environment, and opportunity, and understanding that survival depended not just on instinct or courage, but on the careful integration of observation, adaptation, and calculated action in a world that demanded both vigilance and resilience at every step. Ellie moved cautiously through the shattered remnants of the battlefield, her senses stretched to their absolute limits, every nerve screaming with alertness. The air was thick with smoke and ozone, mingled with the acrid tang of scorched metal and the coppery scent of blood, human and alien alike. Her footsteps echoed faintly against fractured concrete and warped steel, each sound amplified by the stillness around her, and every shadow seemed to twitch with hidden intent. The distant thunder of artillery and the staccato of lasgun fire reminded her that the fight was far from over. Yet the immediate threat was often closer, unseen, and unpredictable. Her heart pounded as she pressed herself against a jagged wall, eyes scanning for movement, for telltale signs of danger that could appear without warning. The ruins around her were jagged and chaotic, buildings twisted into grotesque shapes, scorched and crumbling, their skeletal frames a testament to the unending violence of this world. Ellie's hands gripped her weapons, a bolter she had adapted to use, and her trusty switchblade, grounding her in the tangible, while her mind raced to assess, adapt, and survive. She noticed movement at the edge of her vision. Figures clad in dark spiked armor, their silhouettes imposing and otherworldly. They moved with a predatory precision, scanning the ruins for life, each step deliberate, each gesture signaling coordination. Ellie's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay low, to observe. She had learned long ago that survival depended on understanding one's enemies, reading their patterns, predicting their actions, and acting decisively when opportunity presented itself. The armored figures paused near a collapsed building, one raising a massive barbed weapon in the air, gesturing with authority, issuing silent commands that others responded to without words. Ellie noted the hierarchy, the patterns, and the vulnerabilities inherent in their formation. Each observation became a tool, a lesson, a lifeline. She moved carefully, adjusting her posture, breathing shallowly, calculating distances and angles, integrating every detail into a mental map of the battlefield. The distant sky shimmered with unnatural colors, a sickly green and violet, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently, creating illusions that threatened to disorient and mislead. Ellie forced herself to focus, grounding her perception in tangible threats and immediate survival. Her training, her experience, her instincts all merged as she navigated the twisted streets, weaving between rubble, debris, and shadow, every step deliberate. She noted the subtle vibrations in the ground, the faint hum of alien machinery, the flicker of movement in broken windows, all of which could indicate predators, traps, or approaching patrols. Ellie's mind worked rapidly, running through contingencies, escape routes, and tactical maneuvers, balancing caution with the need to progress. She remembered Joel's lessons, the emphasis on patience, observation, and adaptability, and applied them rigorously in this alien, hostile environment. As she rounded a corner, she encountered a narrow alley, partially obscured by the ruins of a collapsed tower. The shadows pooled deeply, and the faint glow of a distant energy source reflected off jagged metal. Ellie paused, crouched low, and carefully scanned the corridor. Her instincts told her that danger lurked, and she calculated her approach meticulously, noting the possible threats from above, below, and the flanks. A sudden noise, a distant metallic scrape, made her flinch, but she remained still, letting her mind track the source. A small, twisted creature, malformed and grotesque, slithered into view, its multiple limbs moving with unnatural coordination, eyes glinting in the low light. Ellie's body tensed, knife ready, but she allowed it to pass, understanding that some dangers could be avoided entirely if patience and observation were applied. She pressed forward, adapting to the rhythm of the environment. Every muscle coiled, every sense alert. The larger armored figures were now visible in the distance, moving methodically through the ruins, unaware of her presence, but creating obstacles and opportunities simultaneously. Ellie noted their patrol routes, the spacing, the patterns of attention, and began to calculate the optimal path through the labyrinthine streets. The environment itself was hostile. Jagged debris, unstable surfaces, and flickering energy fields challenged her movement, forcing constant adjustments, testing her reflexes, balance, and awareness. Every step, every glance, every breath was a careful negotiation between danger and survival, requiring focus, intuition, and courage. As she advanced, she realized that mastery over her environment, knowledge of enemy behavior, and disciplined application of her instincts could allow her not only to survive, but to maneuver strategically, exploiting weaknesses and avoiding confrontation when possible. The distant echoes of battle, the hum of alien technology, and the subtle psychic disturbances in the air all served as constant reminders that this world demanded total vigilance, adaptability, and awareness. Ellie's mind cataloged every detail, the position of obstacles, the likely patrol routes, the interplay of light and shadow, and the potential reactions of the enemies she could see and those hidden. She pressed forward, balancing stealth with the need for progress. Each decision weighed, each movement deliberate. Her senses worked in concert, guiding her through the ruins, navigating hazards, predicting enemy behavior, and preparing her for the unexpected. Ellie's experience in hostile, unpredictable environments allowed her to maintain a careful rhythm of movement, observation, and calculation, integrating her instincts with the lessons she had learned in this brutal, alien battlefield, and understanding that survival depended on vigilance, adaptability, and the constant negotiation between immediate danger and long-term strategy.